Good morning, everyone joining us. Good morning, good morning. Welcome. As you join us, please do introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know maybe where you're from, perhaps what the weather's like with you. I'm always curious about what it's like in different parts of the UK. But yeah, do say hello. We'll be having lots of participation in this session. So let's get our fingers warmed up. Welcome to those joining. I can see the numbers popping up. Thank you for sharing your time with us this morning. Hi, John. Yeah, let's just keep introducing ourselves through the chat and saying hello. We'll be having lots and lots of participation. Good morning. Fabulous. Hi, Sue. Good morning. Well, I'm going to kick off because let's stick to time, and I know all of us are very busy. So thank you again for sharing time with us this morning. I'm Beth Sampson. I'm the People Lead at Investors in People, and I'll be your host for the next hour. And we're here today to talk about the elephant in the room, the accidental manager problem. I guess it's a common saying that people leave managers, not jobs. And I'm sure most of us will have experienced an accidental manager or two within our careers so far too. We'll be discussing why this is still a problem and maybe some practical takeaways for how we can start tackling it. I'm very lucky to be joined today by Paul Devoy, who's the CEO at Investors in People.
Hi, everyone.
And Dr. Chris Golby, who's the director at Lumien.
Morning, everyone.
Hi, Chris. So as I said, we'll be doing lots and lots of interaction today. So please do get warmed up, introduce yourselves in the chat. We will have lots of different topics that we'll be discussing. And also we'll be hoping to hear from you as we answer the questions through the webinar too. So please do take part. Without further ado, I'm going to dive straight in with assessing the scope of the accidental manager problem. So you should see a poll question pop up shortly asking if you're dealing with accidental managers currently in your business. This is a safe space, we can be honest here. Excellent. Yeah, just seeing those numbers tick up now. Okay, 72% of you have voted. Let's see if we get that a little bit higher. Fabulous. Okay, we're at 81%. So if you haven't pressed a button, quickly do it now. Fab. Okay, so I'm going to share the results, but maybe before I do you want to guess what the percentage is? How many of you are dealing with accidental managers in your business? Do we think it's 50%, 20%? Give me your best guesses. I don't have any prizes, I'm afraid. Okay, I'm saying hundreds, I'm saying 70, 80, 80 to 90. Yeah, 85, 100. Yeah, so you're very, very close. So within our group today, we've got 81% of us currently dealing with accidental managers within our businesses. So a big, big problem. And I know, Chris, you have some slides that you've prepared earlier, which will help us examine this even further. What's the scope of the problem that we're talking about today? Over to you, Chris.
Absolutely, thanks for that.
Thank you.
I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Does that come up okay? Can everyone see that? Brilliant. Okay, so hi everyone. I just wanted to start by introducing myself. So my name's Chris. I'm one of the co-founders at Lumien. I come from a background with a BSc in computer science, a PhD in digital healthcare from Warwick University. I was also a research fellow there for a while, where I did plenty of projects with the NHS, a lot originally in occupational therapy and in physiotherapy as well, but often moved more and more into mental health projects. Around 2012, 2013, I left the university to begin our original company, which was Everlist. And we spent about 5 years working with leading universities and NHS trusts around various mental health projects. Probably flagship project we did was with King's College London and South London and Maudsley NHS Trust. And we appeared on the one show for work we did around psychosis. And as I say, over the years, we did more and more projects within the mental health arena. And around kind of 2018, we began developing out Lumien, which is our own product. Now, this isn't meant to be a product pitch, but I just need to give a little bit of background in order to understand where we've got our data from for this presentation. So Lumien itself helps organizations understand the data behind the well-being in their organization. So we have an employee-facing part of the tool and an employer company-facing part of the tool. The employees are able to get scores in over 85 areas of their well-being, understand what's going on with them, and receive personal recommendations about what they can do. They can be driven by the platform or also driven by the company as well. The company as well also gets a data report, very similar to what's shown on the screen here, where they can receive a well-being score, what they're losing in productivity, and where they're losing that productivity, and what's going on with the well-being in their company, understanding all the different areas. And that's really important because that's the bit I'm going to dig into today, the different areas of well-being within the companies. Now, I wanted to start by just going through the general journey we see companies go on so you can understand where we get this data and what it is companies are looking to understand. So we tend to notice companies begin to tackle mental health and well-being because they want to look after their people, and generally companies want to do that. They want to improve their culture, and also they want to look after the productivity of their staff as well. And so companies turn to mental health and well-being as a way of achieving that. So the first thing they do is they look around often for tools out there. What can be done to really help with the mental health and well-being of my staff? And the first thing we tend to notice they come across is mental health first aid and employee assistance programs, EAP programs. Mental health first aid, very much like physical first aid, allows an individual first aider to be placed in an organization, and when someone's in crisis or experiencing problems, they can present to the first aider. An employee assistance program, very similar. It's a counseling line outside of the company where any individual in crisis can ring up and receive support. Now, the issues with this is, although these are fantastic tools and great for when teams or individuals are in crisis, that they don't allow us to work on the culture of the organization and the productivity. They wait until somebody is in crisis to do something about it. And really, we want to be more proactive in what it is we're doing. And so companies begin to realize this after a period of time. And it's when they start to introduce more proactive tools into the workplace. So they start to introduce things like yoga and mindfulness sessions and begin to send out branded coffee cups and chocolate bars in the post. And while I do not knock any of these, and I think they're fantastic tools, the big question we often set behind all of this is, in what other area of your business would you start a project in without a strategy? So you wouldn't begin digital marketing, putting out adverts or physical marketing without understanding the strategy behind it, understanding the data behind it, really learning what's going on. Now, why is it, with people being such a massive part of our organization, do we not understand that? If people are the most important bit, do we not tackle mental health and well-being of our employees and look to work with them by using a strategy, by using a data-driven tool, understanding what our employees need and not just what we think other companies may have done? And so this is what we tend to notice. And within our system, companies are obviously able to look at this and be able to understand the data behind their employees. And I've got a screen here I've taken out of our platform, which companies tend to enjoy because they can see a snapshot of their organization and begin to really understand this data and what's going on. So they can pick and choose what's really needed within their workforce. And interestingly, very much when we started this, we had the idea that companies would be able to see a range of well-being areas across their workforce, be able to pinpoint specifically what was a difficult area across their workforce. So for instance, here within this example, it could be that nutrition is a difficult area because this is a traffic light system, and you can see that it's particularly red and yellow across the company. And even then, the company may want to look at what's the team that's being most affected by that and be able to pinpoint where they started to tackle this, where they started to introduce interventions. But over time, as we got the data in, we began to realize something different, which was, although companies could tackle particular areas or one area within a team, we began to notice patterns emerging, which showed that actually when one well-being area went down in certain teams, it went down across all the different well-being areas within the team. And we began to notice this and dig into it in companies. And what we often began to find is that, although it doesn't happen in every company, and a lot of companies, management can be a problem here. So management can actually have an impact on the well-being across multiple areas within one team. And we can begin to spot teams where this is an issue and having a direct impact on the well-being of the employees within that organization and within that team. Now, what I wanted to talk about is what does that look like? So what is this? Why is this happening? And often this is because of this case of an accidental manager, which we're here to talk about today. So what is an accidental manager? So an accidental manager is someone who has been promoted because of their technical expertise and track record. Now, for instance, this could be someone who's been in a junior position, gone through to a mid position, and then a senior position maybe, and then they've simply gone the next rung on the ladder, which is into management. So they often understand the tasks the individuals need to do in junior, mid, senior, because they've done them before, but they've never actually managed those people. And so interestingly, 68% of managers categorize themselves as accidental managers within the UK. 50% of employees in the UK say a bad manager is why they leave a job. There's often the idea that you leave a job because of a manager, not because of the company. And 71% of employers in the UK say they don't train their first-time managers. So this is obviously a really prominent problem. And why is it a problem? Well, the Chartered Management Institute say that the most dangerous leadership myth is that leaders are born. This is a real common thing. I'm sure everyone's heard this on films and various TV programs. But leaders are created and not born. You can come through that junior, mid, senior leadership, senior position, but to move into leadership and management, you need leadership and management training. And I've just got an example here of something I took, which says it's about an office manager. So I completely reorganized the office layout without asking any of my team, expecting everyone to listen to me simply because I was the boss or the manager, and assuming I knew better than my staff. So this is the idea that someone's come into a position having been an office manager, all of a sudden they're put in charge of a group of people. And because they've done it before, they feel they can now do it. And they're often still in that what's called a transactional mode, where they're looking at what are the day-to-day items that I need to do when I'm in a junior, mid, or senior position. And often the first thing that someone comes when they're going to management is, I will just tell people to do those transactional items. And this is called transactional leadership skills. And what we often miss when we go into that management is the transformational leadership skills. So these are the soft skills that managers need in order to be able to work with their employees and understand what's going on. So what are these transformational leadership skills? And what I've got here is a list of what we'd expect to see under someone who is not trained in those transformational leadership skills. We'd expect to see employees experience a lack of clarity in their role and insecurity, long hours and a poor work-life balance, and feeling as if they have no support because the manager is so focused upon the transactional skills and what they need to do. And I've mapped here, actually, how this affects their well-being. So this will affect stress within the individual. We also tend to notice that people can feel there's bullying and harassment against them. So there can be bullying and harassment claims come out because they're just simply instructed in what to do and not necessarily gone through that transformational piece. And they can feel isolated and experience poor relationships. And we can often associate this with feelings of loneliness and isolation. There can be a lack of job security as well, and a feeling that they're unsure of what their long-term prospects are. And this can be associated with the distraction at work and not being entirely present. And then they can also experience poor goal setting, unsure where to go, misalignment with values, no recognition or reward, and poor career development. And we often then associate these areas in low engagement with the individuals. So we can see these areas cropping up where there are some areas we may not necessarily spot on the left-hand side here, and then some areas of well-being that begin to be affected, how they affect the individuals within the organization. And I've just got some stats here around those specific well-being areas that we've taken from the Lumien platform, some stats behind it that will help us to see the size of the problem. So accidental managers, we know, can cause immediately a 15% loss in productivity. You take a £30,000 salary, a £31,000 salary, that's almost £5,000 a year for every individual. And imagine a lot of companies have people on over £30,000 salaries, so you can imagine the major effect that's having. People who go through this can experience a 9% direct productivity loss due to stress, a 13% productivity loss due to low engagement, and an 18% productivity loss due to distractions. So some massive productivity losses here. that's caused by their mental health and well-being, which is a direct result of being poorly led by a transformational manager. Now, accidental managers as well could be impacting staff's well-being 15.9% of the time. And I've just got a few extra stats here, which is they're impacted by distraction 16% of the time in the week, 15% by stress during the week, 24% by low mood, 13% by loneliness, and 14% by poor engagement. So realistically, what we can begin to see here are the links between poor management as a result of being promoted into that accidental manager position without that management training, without understanding the transformational sides of what needs to go on, understanding how to look after employees, those string of items we had on the left-hand side there, how then those have a direct impact on the well-being and the mental health of the staff, and how that in turn affects the productivity and how those staff present at work on a day-to-day basis. So we can see in all here the huge problem we have in the UK actually as a whole. And that's the end of my slides for now. So I'll hand back over to Beth at this point. I hope that was useful for everyone.
Thanks, Chris. I would say that was super useful. I think what it does for me is just shine a really bright light on that kind of chain of events, you know, which lead to those outcomes for individuals like stress, distraction. And I think putting a kind of a figure on it as well with productivity is just so important, isn't it? For all of us when we're communicating these kind of topics to our internal stakeholders. I mean, what's definitely coming through for me is that this is clearly a significant issue. So before we start talking about possibly the solutions that we might find, I thought it'd be interesting to explore, you know, what are the obstacles to tackling this problem? What are you experiencing in your businesses which is making it hard to address this? You know, why do you still have those accidental managers? So if you wanted to pop your answers into the chat, and a bit of a tip for you, just in case maybe you have your manager on this call, you can rename yourself if you want to make it come up so you're anonymous, so your name's not attached to the comments there, or you can put it through the Q&A or just address it to the panelists if you don't want other attendees to see it. But yes, share with us, why do you think this is still such a problem? What are the obstacles? And a question for you there, Chris, that's just come through. Are we able to share the slides afterwards, please?
Absolutely. I'll be able to share those out.
Thank you. So while you're all tippy-tappy typing, I'll go to Chris and Paul. What do you think? Why do you think it's such a tricky issue to solve?
So I'll just jump in here. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining this webinar. We assess literally thousands of organisations every year, and this is an issue that is always one of the things that comes up regularly when we work with clients. But I kind of want to start off by advocating for managers a little bit, because I think sometimes when we talk about accidental managers, it's like we're having a bit of a downer on managers in general. Being a manager is an incredibly difficult job. People are wonderful creatures, but they're also incredibly complex. And I think we don't invest enough in managers to enable them to do a good job. And then we're very quick to criticise when we experience bad management. It's not that anyone goes to the work to be a bad manager. I just think it's, as Chris said earlier on, we don't invest enough in the skills for them. And I think that's particularly important now because we're asking more of our managers than we've ever done before. We're asking them to deal with things they've never had to experience before, like managing people remotely. You know, there wasn't a manual for that before, but overnight, because of COVID, we were expecting them to manage people remotely and keep them engaged. We've got a huge mental health crisis. My view is that mental health issues were always there, they were never talked about, but now that people are more open to talk about them, people are presenting these issues to managers, and managers don't necessarily know how to deal with them well. They're under huge pressure to deliver. You know, we've got more skills gaps and shortages in the economy than we've had for a very long time. There's pressures on retention, you know, pressures on people not leaving. So being a manager is a really tough spot to be in at the moment. And I don't think we give them enough care and attention, because it's a bit like when you're on an aeroplane. The first thing they say to you, if there's an emergency, you need to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you look after your family. How can you expect your managers to look after your teams if they're not in a position to look after themselves, first of all. It's a very stressful job, their own well-being, their own development, etc. So while all the stats kind of allude to criticism of managers, what I'm advocating is we need to look after them, we need to invest in them, and we need to give them the best possible opportunity of succeeding, because only by doing that do you enable them to then look after your people. And I think that's something that isn't necessarily always given the attention. It's too easy to diss them, rather than say, well, what do we need to do to support them to be the best they can be? Because as Chris showed, the productivity gain is huge, but also from a social and moral point of view, the impact that they have on their people is huge. If they're stressed and short-tempered and not coping very well, they're not going to be in a position to look after their team. So that would be the only thing that I would add to all the excellent stats that Chris has done. Let's champion managers, let's support them, let's look after them, because it's an investment in doing that. It's not a cost. And I think in organisations we need to pay more attention to that.
Thanks, Paul. I think that last sentence there says it all, doesn't it? This is an investment, not a cost. It will drive the success of your business. And I should say, for the purposes of transparency, Paul is my manager, and I can confirm he is an excellent manager. So yeah. Thank you, Paul.
It's best be making all these anonymous comments on the.
And how about you, Chris? Where do you think this problem is coming from?
Yeah, I think to add to Paul's, it is really important to say it's not necessarily the manager's fault. It can be the training behind what's given to them. And in my eyes, a lot around what we've done is behind that data side of pointing out the well-being effect on organizations. Because historically, I suppose mental health and well-being hasn't necessarily been a big thing within companies. It's not really been driven into the last decade, really, and if even not really the last decade as well. And I think so as we're starting to investigate the whole well-being piece and the whole well-being of individuals within that organization, we're starting to really understand a bit more the soft skills impact that it's actually having on the workforce. Prior to now, and maybe it's a cultural, historical thing within the UK. And I know Paul's got some interesting stats on that as well. There's some historical trends within the UK about the culture of it and promoting people through quickly into management positions. And I think not having that transformational training is so important to them, but it's always been so difficult to spot. It's very easy to spot when a transactional task isn't completed, because it can be noted on a 0 and 1 of one proposition. Is it done or is it not done? And so it's very easy to hammer down on managers if is this task done or is this not done? And then it can become a case of passing the buck, or the politics come into play, or bits like this. And often there's a theory around the 5 whys, which is whenever you get frustrated in an individual of what's happening, often if you ask 5 whys of why it's happening, it comes back to a process of what's happening in the background. And often we can find that's down to adequate training or down to a process that needs to happen. And I think as companies now kind of wake up more and more to this whole person presenting to work that needs to be looked after, then this will come more to the forefront, and we'll realize possibly some of the mistakes we've made historically around managers and supporting those managers in terms of those softer skills.
Thanks, Chris. Some great points there. I think, nobody comes to work to do a bad job in my experience. So it's always important to ask those why questions, like you say, why is this happening? And to dig a little bit deeper. And thank you so much for all of your engagement through the chat. I won't read them all out because that would be terribly boring. But it's great to see all of your comments in there, and also sort of bouncing ideas off each other as well. I've seen things, I think I saw one pop up. It's a really good point that actually if you own your own business and you've developed that from the beginning, it's very likely that you'll never have been a manager before. And then that's another kind of area that you have to develop yourself without ever having perhaps had any training. So I think that's a really important insight. Another one here, you don't know what you don't know. Absolutely true. Until you get that feedback or data, it's very difficult to spot your own sort of blind spots. And then obviously the old chestnut of being promoted because of technical skills and not the people management skills. So, I mean, one of the things I've seen in other organizations is that occasionally those roles are actually split. So a people manager is purely people manager, coach, trainer for their team, and actually they have the kind of technical transactional aspects taken off them, which is one approach, I guess. So speaking of approaches, one of my sayings is that every problem has a solution. So let's start talking about that. What are some of the wins that you've seen in your organization's audience? What have you seen working in terms of leadership development? And Paul, I'll go to you to share your insights on this one.
So did you say come to me there, Beth? I couldn't quite hear you.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's not your fault. I have to confess I've got builders at my house. There's a bit of noise outside, so
try shouting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of different things that we could look at, and I'll try and kind of boil it down to the most important things. And really building on the point that you made there, Beth, we need to identify people who have got the capacity and capability to move into managerial roles, and remove this paradigm, this assumption that you become good at a technical role and then move into a managerial role. It's not necessarily what everybody wants to do. Chris is right, leaders are not born, they are made, but some people don't have an appetite to do it for a whole variety of reasons. So I think one of the issues that we need to explore is around about how you design jobs at that managerial level. And as Beth alluded to, if someone just wants to focus on becoming an expert in the technical aspects of a role, there needs to be some career progression taking a purely technical route. There seems to be a glass ceiling at the moment that if you want to progress at some point or other, you need to start managing teams, and it's not suited to everyone. So having an approach where you identify early on the people who have the capacity, capability, and appetite to be managers, and develop them before you put them into management positions. I think too often we find out that people aren't suited to it after the fact, and they've already done damage to themselves and others by that point. So actually, doing that analysis beforehand about who's got the right capacity and capability and appetite before you move them into that position. And then I think the second aspect is around about the type of training that you provide. There's a lot of snake oil sellers out there around about management and leadership training, and not all of it works. So I think, being really clear about what it is that you want to develop, and being clear about what does leadership behaviours look like in your organisation, what are the technical aspects of a leader and manager that you're looking for, and then make sure that the training is tailored to that. And I would put one caution on seeing training as a panacea. Someone described to me once an analogy about it's a bit like if you've got a manager who's in a fishbowl full of dirty water, and then you take the dirty water being effectively the culture of the organisation, and then you take that fish out into clean water and train them about what good management looks like. When you put them back in the dirty water, they'll just revert back to the environment that they're in again. So it's not just about training your managers, it's about thinking about the culture within which those managers operate, and how do you create a culture that enables good management, that enables that transparency, that enables that two-way feedback, that enables the right conversations to have at the right time. All of those elements need to be there, and it needs to be looked at as a holistic approach rather than just saying, we put everybody through a management development program, they'll all be fine now. Well, if the culture's toxic anyway, it won't work. So you can't separate culture and management training. The two things are intertwined, and the two things have a massive impact on each other. So for me, that's really, really important as well. And having the right support mechanisms around managers. One of the things that I think Beth has done brilliantly in our organisation is create peer-to-peer support networks where managers can go into little groups and talk to each other about problems that they're facing. And then that helps them share and learn from each other and get that peer-to-peer support, because it can be quite a lonely job. And who do you go to for support? So if you can build up a network of trust amongst your managers and give them the opportunity to go and share their experiences and learning with each other, that's something that I've seen that in our own organisation that Beth should take credit for that works really well.
Thanks, Paul. I think that image that you describe of the goldfish bowls is really powerful. That definitely sort of sticks in my mind. It's a really clear way of describing this. And I also thought it's interesting what you said about the kind of cultural piece, because, you know, one thing we perhaps haven't touched on is that actually having accidental managers in the organisation could be a symptom of that cultural side, you know, not being quite right, or perhaps needing a bit more attention or investment. Perhaps the fact that you have accidental managers points to, you know, maybe reactive promotions and that kind of thing. So I completely agree with you. It's important to look at it holistically and as a whole. Yeah, someone's saying in the chat they love your goldfish bowl description.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Chris, have you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really wanted to pick up on the cultural piece and the fact that, and what Paul said about a lot of snake oil management training, which is particularly what works in one organization might not necessarily work the same in another organization. So that there's not a silver bullet to this. There's not a kind of one size fits all. And if you really want to change things, you need to look at I think someone put it in the chat. What are the behaviors you want out of your managers? What fits within the culture? What maps? And I think for me, really interesting, HR as a whole is changing. It's going through a change procedure at the moment. So historically, it's been seen as something you just needed to have in order to get through the legalities of running a company. And I see this transition happening over to, I mean, some people will say it's HR transforming, some people will say it's moving to more organizational development and positioning that way. But what I see is HR business partners appearing, and realistically, this whole area moving to more of a value-added service to the business. Our mission statement behind our company is around wanting boards to have actionable insights into their culture health within the organization, because we often see that HR is kind of pushed to the side. Companies will go, we'll look at our balance sheet, we'll look at our P&L, but you don't look at the people. Often it's raised in a board meeting and it's spoken about, and then everyone sort of sits back, nods, and the meeting carries on to other finance areas. But I think that's changing, and HR is realizing that needs to change. And in order to do that, it needs to behave like the other areas of business. So it needs to have data behind it, it needs to have strategy behind it, and move in that way. And so if you really fundamentally want to tackle this accidental manager problem, it's not necessarily the case of just chucking money at it, which I think a few people will do. And what sometimes this area can come across as is, people are poor at management because we just haven't thrown money at training, and we can throw money at training and it will work, which is not necessarily the case, because if we go back to it, it's different from one organization to another as to what is needed. And we need to understand, is the culture right in the organization? Are people looked after? Are they well? Are people behaving? Are our managers matching to that behavior? Are we getting out of them what we need out of the organization? And I think this emergence of HR analytics and people analytics that backs up this organizational development area is really important. And I think I think a lot of the time as well, to add to that, a lot of smaller organizations think, HR analytics, people analytics, so that's something for, your KPMGs and your big service providers, where it's absolutely not. You can go down to the smallest organizations. We work with organizations as small as 5 people to really understand the data, because at the end of the day, you just don't know what's going on behind the scenes of even one individual, let alone a small team of people. And companies really need to be moving with this and understanding that, if you're going to work with the new workforces coming through, the younger generations coming through, then you need to really understand what's going on as a whole across the individuals, and understand that whole person approach to taking on board an employee. And I think that's really important to think about it in that way. So in summary, to understand the data behind what's going on and look at the trends and that change in how HR and how well-being is moving as a whole.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And I just want to go back to the chat and pull out some of the points here. I think one of our first answers coming through about what's worked for you and what great leadership development looks like talks about long-term development and career succession plans. And I think the the kind of time period is key here, isn't it? This perhaps isn't one of those things that you can write down on your to-do list and tick off by the end of the day. It is a longer term, investment and approach. So I think that's an excellent point that's come through there. Also having that clarity about what great management looks like and rewarding those behaviors. So again, like we talked about, having that kind of consistent holistic approach. So you're not saying on one hand, please be a great manager and leader, and then on the other hand, you're rewarding things that are counter to that. So another great insight. A point here about training. It's important that it addresses self-awareness, bias, prejudice, and inclusive management styles. Absolutely. And then another point here from Simon, also talking about self-awareness. And I think balancing the qualitative and quantitative insights, as you've said, Chris, to help people make consistently better choices. I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because perhaps it can be off-putting that people are complicated and messy and individual, but actually there's so much data that we can access now, especially with the help of different organizations and solutions that can help you make those better choices. And then lastly, we've got culture being a key factor. And there is a period of transition for many businesses, shifting from industry-based economy to knowledge-based, a messy phase. And I have to confess, I quite like messiness. I think that's where the most interesting pieces of work are. So I think it's good to hear that I'm in good company on this call. So we've got 20 minutes left. I would encourage everybody to keep posting through your questions for Paul and Chris. And I'm going to go to them with a question now. Speaking of being holistic and taking a different view, I wanted to ask you, how big a problem is this, do you think, from a kind of UK economy point of view?
I'll go first on that one. So if you look back at the economic data, you can see that the UK always is towards the bottom of the productivity charts against our G7 or G20 competitors. And one of the main drivers for that lack of productivity is the fact that we don't invest enough, as you'd be surprised to hear, in our leadership and management. And someone quoted something to me that really stuck in my mind. A French worker who we have a perception is always on strike and always have all these biases around about all of that. A French worker can go home on a Thursday night having produced the same amount as a British worker can do in 5 days. So it's not just about working harder, it's working smarter. So if we don't address this issue, then we're going to continue to have real problems with our skills gaps and shortages. And I think some of the things that we haven't tackled in the previous 10 years are coming home to roost now. And in the networks that I'm involved in with CEOs and MDs, their number one issue at the moment is staff retention and recruitment. And if you've watched the news recently, there's 1 million job vacancies. Part of the problem is we haven't invested enough in our workforce prior to this. And this has been a crisis that's coming. And somebody said to me, businesses fail slowly and then suddenly. And the whole thing with management development and skills has been happening slowly, and now suddenly we're short of truck drivers and we're short of rough casters. It took me 6 months for the guys that are rough casting my house outside to turn up because they just can't get the skills. So, if we're not investing in our people and we're not investing in our managers, it's going to have a direct impact in both the short term and the long term. But now we are paying real short-time prices for not having dealt with it and invested in it earlier. And hopefully this is an inflection point for our economy, that we realise we need to invest in our people and not just take short-term actions to try and address problems, that we take more of a longer-term investment-based approach, because the return will come, but it doesn't necessarily come immediately. But when it does come, it's a significant upside. And I think we really need to make that business case to employers in the round.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. And Chris?
Yeah, so interestingly, what I wanted to mention was not just about the current economy and the way it is now, but the change that's happening and the change that's going to happen within this. So it's the link to an area about the changing workforce. So there's a stat that 50% of millennials and 75% of Gen Zers have left a job because of poor mental health and well-being. So that's 75%. There's also a stat that 70% of the UK workforce is disengaged from their job and not quite engaged enough with it on a day-to-day basis. So you've got this area here that you've got disengaged people struggling with well-being, and you can't help but attribute that to some of the management that's going on and putting people in the right places, making sure people are engaged, making sure people are looked after. And it's interesting to me because there's always a thing of, well, you know, I know we talk particularly about mental health, well-being, but also management training, that this is something that can be put on the kind of backbench. So it can be pushed away, and you know, this is something we'll handle later when the organization gets a bit bigger, because this is just something we chuck money at. And I know historically when I started up and when we started our business, we were guilty of the same thing, but it's not necessarily something you just need to put money into and train people in. The training is obviously beneficial, but it's something you can start to begin work on and appreciate what's happening in your organization. And particularly, you're going to struggle over time to just recruit more and more. Retention is going to be difficult, as Paul alluded to. And if you haven't got your retention piece right, your actual recruitment is going to be difficult as a whole as well. You need to get that retention piece right to get the recruitment piece right. And I think it's that whole area that the workforce is changing. The workforce is getting younger, and people coming through are changing. I was in a group yesterday, a group of CEOs, and we spoke very much about the 24-hour working life. So this idea that you're being texted at 11:30 at night about a work task, and what rules and what are you putting in place to do that. And often there was a comment which was, well, that happens just because we're now in a leadership position. Naturally, our work days have become longer, and this has happened. And so a lot of people in the room were kind of 60 plus. Okay. And I actually turned around to them and challenged it and said, well, when you were 20 and coming through the workforce, did you have access to a mobile phone where your emails were turned on 24 hours a day? And of course they said no. And I said, so how do you feel that a 20-year-old coming through your workforce is looking up without adequate management, just watching transactionally what everything going on in the workforce is, and thinking, well, I have to be looking at my phone at 12 o'clock at night in order to replicate what my managers above me are happening. And so not only are the people changing, but the workplace we work in is changing. It's becoming more virtual. It's becoming more 24 hours. This is hybrid mix, as everybody knows. But realistically, this is something companies need to make a change to adapt to now. And it's been sped up by COVID, if anything. So if you're not just looking to put in that work to understand what your culture is, what your values are, look how to match that with your workforce, make sure, are your managers enacting the behavior that can be done? Do you understand what's needed? Do you understand the data behind it? And these are tasks that can be done without massive outlays on big corporate coaching packages and big corporate leadership packages. They're things that can be done and implemented now. And I would encourage everyone here to start tackling that and looking at that immediately, because your people are your most valuable asset. And so you can be doing things to tackle that now, and it's something that shouldn't be put on the back burner.
Yeah, such an important point, Chris. And I can see we've got people agreeing with you in the chat as well. It's interesting, isn't it, how quickly things are moving, and conversations that you would never have expected to happen, 2 years ago are coming up. We've talked about, having meeting-free days, or, how do you define a meeting? Is that a Slack message? Is it an interaction? How do you get that balance of thinking, doing, and interacting? And I think, as you've mentioned, it's come up in the chat too, it's important to make deliberate choices about that and to be explicit and to think about the consequences, because otherwise, as we've got here, they can become culture, and then they lead to problems further down the line if you haven't thought about it carefully at this kind of mobile, I guess, unfrozen, to use a change management phrase, transition period. So I'm just going to pause and I'm going to press you as an audience to put any questions through for Chris and Paul now. And my last point back to you both is to ask for your top 3 takeaways. So what can we take away today to help us sort of address this opportunity? I'm not going to use the word problem anymore. I think it's an opportunity. And equally in the audience as well, I can see we've got 42 people with us today. Please do share your insights and takeaways too, so we can all learn from each other, because we don't have a monopoly on the good ideas, do we? I'll go to you first, Chris, please, for your top 3 takeaways.
I think for me, the first one being, this is not just some big task for corporate companies. Everyone can start, whether it's a small team within a corporate company, whether it's a small organization. Everyone can tackle leadership by understanding culture, values, understanding what's going on with their staff. So this is something you can begin to take action on immediately, and it's something that should be taken action on straight away after this call today when you go away. So it's something that can be done, and something that doesn't have to cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to train managers. My second one would be, make sure you go about tackling this in a strategic manner. So think it through and think through what's happening with the people. And then the third one would be to look at what Paul said, which is, don't believe that you can look at the global state of productivity and to look at where the UK is with this. I don't necessarily believe that someone should be promoted straight into management, but to look at that productivity side of it. Why is the UK so poorly performing in comparison to everything else? And that we should be looking at how we can improve that as a whole. And that would be my top 3.
Thanks, Chris. Over to you, Paul, for your top 3.
Yeah, so my first one would be being clear about what does good leadership and management look like in your organisation, and being really investing. And I think that's an important thing. We need to talk about the cost of this, that this is an investment. So we need to invest in leadership because we know it's going to pay huge dividends. So like any other investment, what does good look like for us? What does good look like for our leadership and management, and being really clear about what that is? And then the second question would be, instead of going to all our managers all the time and telling them what we want from them, ask them, what do you need? What is it that you need to bring the best version of yourself into work every day as a leader? What support do you need? And do that in a way where that they feel that it's a genuine question, not that it's just a sort of transactional thing, as Chris was talking about earlier. We're genuinely interested to understand, because we know and can quote all the stats that Chris has put out earlier. We know this is a genuine problem, and we know maybe in the past we haven't paid enough attention to it, but we're going to change now. We recognise we got that wrong. What do you need? How do we help you bring the best version of yourself into work every day? What do you need to be the best leader that you can be? And then the third one is having a really clear short, medium, and long-term plan about what you're going to do about it. And it doesn't necessarily need to involve spending lots of money. So some of the initiatives that Beth has put in our organisation cost nothing. It was just about creating the space for people to talk to each other and share and learn and support. And that word support probably doesn't get enough attention, that they're there as a mutual support network for each other. There are things that you can do that don't cost anything. You don't need to send them to Harvard or train them to be McKinsey level consultants. That might be something that you do down the line, but really understand from them what do they need, put in things in place to support them, and then you can then build your business case about what, if there is investment needed that requires specific types of training, you can build that case out. So that they would be my 3 things.
Thanks, Paul. And I guess one from me as well that's helped, I think, with us. When I started very early on, I put in regular catch-ups with all of our managers. Obviously, it's something we can do as we're not huge, but even if you have that kind of HR business partnering model, I think if you can make time, even if it's every 2 weeks, for your manager to sit down with you and just have that space, like Paul said, to talk through what's going on for them, what are their needs, what are they feeling vulnerable about, and that gives you so much information and data that you can then work with so that your programs are really addressing the needs that exist. Because I think assumptions are very dangerous. You know, if managers are very busy, you do time management training, but actually maybe that's not the right solution. And that does tie in actually to a question that we've had come through from Gillian. So she's asked, what specific areas or topics of L&D do you think work well to support the accidental manager? Obviously accepting that not one size does not fit all, but what could make a difference, do you think?
I think if I had to pick one, and I'm reluctant to pick one, but if I would have to pick one, I think training, providing people training and coaching, and I've seen that in one of the comments that's there. You know, asking the right questions, not feeling like as a manager you need to be this all-seeing, all-knowing being that has the answers to everything. Teaching them to coach, to ask the right questions, to help the member of their team explore and own the answer themselves. So that for me would be one area where L&D can come in as really support managers about how they can use coaching techniques to ask the right questions, because that solicits information that they can then work with, rather than feeling like they've got to come with all the solutions all the time. Because just because you're a manager doesn't mean you know better than your team. Your team probably know better than you. So asking the right questions in the right way and training people how to do that, I think is really important.
Yeah, that brings to mind the old saying, doesn't it? If you give someone a fish, they'll eat that day. If you teach them to fish, they'll never be hungry again, assuming they live near a river. So yeah, I like that one, coaching. Any thoughts on that, Chris? Any specific kind of L&D topics?
I think mine's kind of linked, and it's very much along the same remit, which is around teaching on leadership. So as well as this coaching, because I think a lot of people, when they go into management, particularly in our culture, is very much associated with just getting people to do tasks. And I often think if the term was rephrased as leadership instead of management, people would have a very different view of it. So this idea of being a leader within the organization, and you know, as Paul said, being able to show that sense of vulnerability. I think people think as a manager, you need to be able to do everything that the junior, mid and seniors below you can do. And if they have a problem, be able to come to you and you always have the answer, which is absolutely not the case. You need to be a leader, and you need to be able to tackle where to get that information from when you need it, when be able to push for the team to be able to find out that information, when to be able to push for them to teach between them, to be able to show that sense of vulnerability that you don't know that. And those important areas as a leader, you know, it's all about language and how you proceed in that. And I think that for me would be the critical point about training about leadership, and make sure people understand that they're a leader and not just a person that dishes out tasks on a day-to-day basis and follows a protocol.
Yeah, great point, Chris. Thank you. So we've actually covered all of our questions that we have prepared for you today. So thank you all so much for being so engaged in the chat as well. I think there's wonderful insights in there. We'll also make sure that we follow this up with slides from Chris, so you've got those to refer to and take away. So all that remains is for me to thank Chris and Paul very much for all of their contributions, and also to all of you for sharing part of your morning with us. So I hope you all have a fantastic day.